The Afghan sun beat down mercilessly on the village of Khost, turning the dusty streets into an oven. Lieutenant Sarah Chen moved carefully through the narrow alleyways, her team spread out in tactical formation behind her. This was supposed to be a routine patrol, check in with village elders, assess security conditions, move on to the next location. Sarah had been a Navy SEAL for 6 years, one of the few women to complete the grueling training program. She'd earned her trident the hard way, proving herself again and again to men who didn't think she belonged. Even now, leading her own fire team, she sometimes caught the skeptical looks from other units. The doubt never quite went away. But her team trusted her. That was what mattered. "Lieutenant, we've got movement in the compound ahead," Petty Officer Marcus Webb reported through the comm. "Thermal shows multiple signatures, but they're not moving like hostiles." Sarah raised her fist, signaling the team to halt. She pulled up her tactical display, studying the heat signatures. Webb was right. The movement patterns were all wrong for an ambush. Too chaotic, too random. "Could be civilians sheltering from the heat," she said. "Let's check it out. Standard approach, Webb Rodriguez with me, Chang Hendricks cover our 6. They moved toward the compound, a mud brick structure that had seen better days. Half the roof had collapsed and bullet holes pocked the walls. Another casualty of 2 decades of war. Sarah was 3 meters from the entrance when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong in a combat zone, a sound that made her heart clench despite all her training. "Puppies crying." She held up her hand again, signaling her team to hold position. Through the doorway she could see movement, small, frantic, desperate. "Stay alert," she ordered, then moved to the entrance and peered inside. What she saw made her breath catch. 2 German Shepherd puppies, maybe 8 weeks old, huddled in the corner of the ruined building. They were filthy, emaciated, trembling. But what struck Sarah most were their eyes, not the scared, wild eyes of feral dogs, but intelligent, pleading eyes that seemed to recognize hope when they saw it. The moment Sarah stepped into the compound, both puppies scrambled toward her with heartbreaking desperation. They latched onto her leg, whimpering and shaking, their tiny bodies pressing against her combat boots as if she were their last chance at survival. "Boss, what have you got?" Webb asked from outside. "Puppies," Sarah said, kneeling down. The dogs immediately climbed into her lap, their small bodies warm against her tactical vest. "Just puppies." She ran her hands over them, checking for injuries. Both were severely malnourished, their ribs visible beneath matted fur. But there was something else, something that made Sarah's trained eye pause. These weren't village dogs. Their builds were too good, their features too refined. And around each of their necks, half hidden by dirty fur, were collars. Not the rope or leather scraps local dogs sometimes wore, but actual tactical collars, expensive military-grade equipment. Sarah's fingers found the small metal tags attached to the collars. She wiped away the dirt and read the engraving on the first one. Her blood ran cold. "Webb, get in here, now." The petty officer appeared in the doorway, weapon ready. "What's wrong?" Sarah held up the tag so he could see it. Stamped into the metal were a name, a number, and a unit designation that every operator in the region knew. K9 Handler LT. Commander James Morrison, SEAL Team 7. Jim Morrison. Sarah knew him, not well, but they'd crossed paths during training rotations. A good man, a dedicated handler, and one of the best K9 operators in the teams. His primary dog, a German Shepherd named Titan, had saved dozens of lives during explosive detection missions. 6 weeks ago, Morrison and his team had gone missing during a raid on a Taliban compound near the Pakistan border. The official story was that they'd been ambushed, that there were no survivors, but bodies had never been recovered, and the military had classified the entire operation. "Jesus," Webb breathed, "are those Morrison's dogs?" Sarah finished. "Or at least they're wearing his gear." She checked the second puppy's tag. Same information, same unit designation. But these puppies were too young to have been Morrison's working dogs, which meant something else entirely. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. Morrison had been working with Titan for years. If Titan had bred, if these were his offspring, then someone had put those collars on these puppies deliberately. Someone who knew what they meant. Someone who wanted them found. "We need to bring them in," Sarah said, making a decision that would change everything. "Lieutenant, you know the regulations," Webb said carefully. "We can't." "We're bringing them in," Sarah repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. "These dogs are connected to a missing SEAL team. Their evidence may be the only evidence we'll get, and I'm not leaving them here to die." She stood cradling both puppies against her chest. They burrowed into her vest, seeking warmth and safety. The rest of the patrol was tense. Sarah's mind worked overtime, trying to piece together what had happened. How had these puppies ended up alone in a destroyed compound? Where was Morrison's team? And why hadn't anyone else found these dogs in the 6 weeks since the team went missing? Back at the forward operating base, Sarah's decision to bring in the puppies created immediate controversy. "Lieutenant Chen, what the hell is this?" Captain Briggs demanded when she entered the Tactical Operations Center with 2 German Shepherd puppies still clinging to her. "Potential intelligence, sir," Sarah said crisply. "These animals were found wearing tags belonging to LT, Commander Morrison's K-9 unit. I believe they're connected to the missing SEAL team." Briggs looked like he wanted to argue, but the mention of Morrison's name gave him pause. "Morrison, the team that went dark 6 weeks ago." "Yes, sir. I'm requesting permission to have these animals evaluated by our veterinary staff and to open an investigation into their origin." "Lieutenant, you can't just adopt every stray dog you find in theater." "With respect, sir, these aren't strays. Someone put those collars on them. Someone who knew what they meant. This could be our first lead on what happened to Morrison's team." The captain studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, get them to the vet. But Chen, if this turns out to be nothing, you're writing up the after-action report explaining why you wasted resources on a couple of dogs." "Understood, sir." Sarah carried the puppies to the base medical facility, where the veterinary staff shared space with the human doctors. The on-duty vet, an Army captain named Dr. Lisa Okoye, looked up in surprise when Sarah entered. "Let me guess," Dr. Okoye said with a tired smile. "You found some strays." "Not exactly." Sarah placed the puppies on the examination table. "These dogs were found wearing equipment belonging to a missing SEAL team. I need you to examine them thoroughly. Check for anything unusual, any signs of where they've been or who's been handling them." Dr. Okoye's expression shifted from amusement to professional focus. She began her examination methodically, checking the puppies' overall health while Sarah watched. "They're severely malnourished," the vet said after a few minutes. "Dehydrated, covered in parasites. They've been on their own for at least a week, maybe 2, but before that," she paused, running her hands along one puppy's legs and spine. "Before that, someone was taking very good care of them. Their bone structure is excellent, their muscle development is right where it should be for their age. These dogs had proper nutrition and handling for the first 6 or 7 weeks of their lives." "Can you tell anything else?" Dr. Okoye picked up one of the collars, examining it closely under a magnifying lamp. "These are definitely military-grade K-9 collars. Custom-fitted, too. Someone made these specifically for puppies this size. And look here." She pointed to a small pocket sewn into the collar's lining. "These have document pouches, just like adult working dog collars." Sarah's heart began to race. "Check them." The vet carefully opened the first pouch. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material, was a small piece of paper. She unfolded it with tweezers and placed it under the light. The message was brief, written in tight, precise handwriting. "Titan's pups. Safe house compromised. Send to Bagram. Trust no one local." Check the other one, Sarah said urgently. The second collar held another message, this one even shorter. GPS 33, 9,391 degrees N, 67, 7,099 degrees E. Morrison alive. Hurry. Sarah pulled out her tactical map and plotted the coordinates. The location was deep in Taliban-controlled territory, about 40 kilometers from where the team had gone missing. This is intelligence, she said, more to herself than to Dr. Akoy. This is someone trying to communicate, using the only messengers they thought could get through. You think Morrison is alive? The vet asked quietly. I think someone wanted us to know where to look. Sarah picked up both notes carefully, and they used his dogs, his children's dogs, to get the message out. She thought about the risk involved. Someone had taken these puppies, put them in harm's way, sent them across enemy territory with messages that could mean life or death. It was desperate. It was brilliant. And it suggested that somewhere, someone from Morrison's team was still alive and trying to get help. But the message also said to trust no one local, which meant the team had been betrayed, that their mission had been compromised from the inside. That revelation alone was enough to shake the foundations of their entire operation in the region. Sarah made her decision quickly. Dr. Akoy, I need you to keep these dogs here and keep this quiet. Tell no one what we found. I need to take this to someone I trust. Who? I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they need to be outside the local chain of command. Sarah left the medical facility with the 2 messages secured in her pocket and her mind racing. She had just stumbled onto something massive, a missing SEAL team, a possible mole in their operations, and 2 puppies who might be the key to bringing everyone home. But first, she needed to figure out who she could trust. As she walked across the base in the fading light, Sarah thought about those puppies clinging to her leg, about the desperation in their eyes. Someone had loved those dogs enough to risk everything sending them for help. Someone was counting on the fact that American soldiers wouldn't leave dogs behind, that the collars would be noticed, that the messages would be found. Someone believed that even in the middle of a war zone, even surrounded by betrayal and death, there were still people who would do the right thing. Sarah intended to prove them right. Back in her quarters, Sarah sat on her bunk and pulled out her personal laptop. She started researching everything she could find about LT, Commander Morrison and his team. Official records were sparse, classified mission details, redacted after-action reports. But Sarah had learned long ago that the official record wasn't always the complete record. She reached out through secure channels to people she trusted, asking careful questions. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Morrison's team had been tracking a high-value target, a Taliban commander with connections to both local insurgents and foreign fighters. The mission had been based on intelligence provided by a local informant, someone embedded in the Taliban network. The team had raided the compound, but instead of finding the target, they'd walked into an ambush. 3 operators had been killed immediately. The rest had gone to ground. For 6 weeks there had been silence. The military had written them off as casualties, though no bodies had been recovered. But now Sarah knew better. At least one member of that team was alive, hiding in enemy territory, trying desperately to get a message out. And they'd used Titan's puppies to do it. Sarah thought about the logistics. Titan must have bred before the mission. Morrison would have known his dog was going to have puppies. He would have arranged for them to be cared for. But when the mission went wrong, when the team went into hiding, someone had made the decision to use those puppies as messengers. It was risky, it was heartbreaking, but it might just work. Sarah pulled out the GPS coordinates again, studying the location. It was isolated, deep in the mountains, far from any known military or Taliban positions. A perfect place to hide, a terrible place to try to rescue someone from. She needed help, real help, not the local command, not anyone who might have been involved in the betrayal. She needed someone from outside the theater, someone with the authority and resources to mount a rescue operation. Sarah composed a message on the encrypted system, addressing it to a contact at JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. She explained what she'd found, attached photos of the messages, and requested immediate assistance. Then she waited. The response came 4 hours later. Short, cryptic but promising: stand by, team en route, maintain security. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Help was coming. Now she just had to keep those puppies safe and figure out how to bring Morrison's team home. She returned to the medical facility, where Dr. Okoye had set up a temporary kennel for the puppies. They were sleeping now, curled together in a clean blanket, their bellies full for the first time in weeks. "How are they doing?" Sarah asked quietly. "Better. I've started them on fluids and antibiotics. They'll need time to recover, but they're tough little things." Dr. Okoye looked at Sarah carefully. "You're going after their handler, aren't you?" "If he's alive, I'm bringing him home." "Good, because these puppies deserve to know their father." Sarah reached into the kennel and gently touched one puppy's head. The dog stirred, opened its eyes, and looked at her with that same trusting gaze from the compound. Then it yawned and went back to sleep. "Hold on," Sarah whispered. "We're coming for him." 48 hours after Sarah found the puppies, a team arrived at the forward operating base with minimal fanfare. They came in on a night flight, moving through the base like shadows, drawing no attention. Sarah was summoned to a secure briefing room at 300 hours. Inside, she found 3 men and 1 woman, all wearing civilian clothes but carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of special operations personnel. The woman stepped forward first. "Lieutenant Chen, I'm Commander Patricia Walsh, JSOC. This is Master Chief Dan Sullivan, Chief Warrant Officer Mike Torres, and Staff Sergeant Rachel Kim. We're here about your discovery." Sarah stood at attention. "Ma'am." "At ease. Sit down. We need to talk about what you found and what it means." Walsh opened a folder and spread several satellite images across the table. "Your message got people's attention at very high levels. A missing SEAL team, possible insider betrayal, and a rescue signal delivered by puppies. It's the kind of story that sounds made up." "I wish it was, ma'am." Walsh studied her for a moment. "Your record is impressive, Lieutenant. Top of your class in Bud S, multiple commendations, consistent performance ratings. Your team respects you. Your commanders, well, some of them are still adjusting to the idea of female SEALs." Sarah kept her expression neutral. She'd heard this before, the careful acknowledgement that she was good at her job, followed by the reminder that not everyone accepted her. "But here's what matters," Walsh continued. "You found something that everyone else missed. You made the right call bringing those dogs in, and now we need your help figuring out how to bring Morrison's team home." She pointed to the satellite images. "These are thermal scans of the area around your GPS coordinates. We've been watching for 3 days now. There's definitely someone there. We're seeing heat signatures consistent with 3 to 5 individuals, moving in patterns that suggest military training. They're holed up in a cave system, probably using it as a hide site." Master Chief Sullivan leaned forward. "The question is whether they're Morrison's team or Taliban using the location as a base. We can't risk a rescue operation if we're walking into a trap." "The message said Morrison was alive," Sarah said. "It was written in English using military terminology. It has to be legitimate." "Or it's Taliban intelligence officers who captured Morrison and are using his knowledge to set up an ambush," Torres countered. "We've seen it before." Sarah felt frustration rising but kept her voice calm. "Then why use the puppies? Why send Titan's offspring with messages? Taliban wouldn't know about Morrison's dog breeding program. They wouldn't have access to military K-9 collars or know to send the dogs to an American patrol route." "Unless Morrison told them," Sullivan said quietly, "under duress." The room fell silent. Sarah understood what they were suggesting, that Morrison might have been tortured, forced to provide information, used as bait. It was a possibility that made her sick to consider. "I don't believe that," Sarah said firmly. "Morrison is SEAL Team 7. He wouldn't break. And even if he did, he wouldn't endanger animals. Anyone who knows him knows that." Walsh nodded slowly. "You're right. Morrison's psych profile suggests he'd die before putting animals in danger, which means we have to consider that he's alive, in control of his faculties, and trying to get rescued." "So what's the plan?" Sarah asked. "That's where you come in." Walsh pulled out another set of images, topographical maps of the mountain region. "We're putting together a rescue team, but we need someone who knows the local terrain, who's been operating in this area. Someone the missing team might recognize and trust." Sarah's pulse quickened. "You want me on the rescue team?" "I want you leading the ground element," Walsh corrected. "My team will provide tactical support and extraction, but you'll be the first face Morrison sees. You'll be the one making contact." It was an honor and a massive responsibility. It was also dangerous, inserting into enemy territory with a small team, trying to locate and extract survivors who'd been hiding for 6 weeks, all while avoiding Taliban patrols and potential ambushes. "When do we leave?" Sarah asked. 72 hours. We need time to plan, to position assets, to prepare contingencies. In the meantime, I need you to learn everything you can about Morrison, his team, and his dog. If we make contact, you'll need to convince him quickly that you're legitimate. One wrong word and they might think you're an enemy trick." Walsh slid another file across the table. "This is everything we have on Morrison's team and their mission. Study it. Memorize it. Your life and theirs may depend on knowing the right details." Sarah took the file and stood. "I won't let you down, ma'am." "I know you won't. You've already proved that by not leaving those puppies behind." The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Sarah spent hours studying Morrison's background, learning about his career, his deployments, his K-9 program. She learned that Titan had been with him for 8 years, that the dog had detected over 40 IEDs and saved countless lives. She learned that Morrison had started a breeding program to create the next generation of military working dogs, carefully selecting traits for intelligence, courage, and loyalty. She also learned about his team, 4 other SEALs who'd gone missing with him. Chief Petty Officer David Grant, an explosives expert. Petty Officer First Class Antonio Rivera, a medic. Petty Officer Second Class Kyle Johnson, communications specialist. And Petty Officer Third Class Sean Murphy, the youngest member of the team at just 23. 5 men who'd served their country with distinction. 5 men who'd been written off as casualties. 5 men who might still be alive, waiting for rescue. Sarah also spent time with the puppies. Dr. Akoy had continued their treatment, and they were responding well. Their eyes were brighter now, their movements more energetic. They were starting to look like the healthy, happy puppies they should have been. "They're bonding with you," Dr. Akoy observed one evening as Sarah sat in the kennel, both puppies curled in her lap. "I'm just the one who found them." "No, it's more than that. Dogs know. They recognize who saved them, who cares about them." The vet smiled. "What are you going to name them?" Sarah hadn't thought about it. She'd been so focused on the mission, on the rescue, that she hadn't considered the puppies as individuals with names and futures. "Hope," she said suddenly, looking down at the slightly larger puppy. "This one's Hope." She touched the smaller one gently. "And this one's Faith." Hope and Faith. Good names for dogs who carried impossible messages through enemy territory. On the second day of preparation, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Captain Briggs appeared at her quarters, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant, a word." Sarah followed him outside, wondering if he was going to pull her from the mission. "I've been read in on what you're planning," Briggs said without preamble. "Rescue operation, deep in enemy territory, based on intelligence from puppies." Yes, sir. It's crazy, it's risky, and it's probably going to get people killed. He paused, then added, it's also the right thing to do. Sarah felt surprise. Sir, I gave you a hard time about those dogs. I thought you were being emotional, making decisions based on sentiment rather than tactical sense. I was wrong. Briggs looked uncomfortable admitting it. You saw what everyone else missed. You made the connection. You might be about to save 5 men's lives because you didn't give up on 2 puppies. I appreciate that, sir. Don't get yourself killed out there, Chen. You're a good officer, we need you. He hesitated, then added, and I'm sorry for doubting you. It was as close to an apology as Sarah had ever heard from the captain. She nodded acknowledgement, and Briggs left without another word. The encounter stayed with Sarah. For so long, she'd fought to be taken seriously, to prove that she belonged. And now, on the eve of one of the most dangerous missions she'd ever undertaken, her commanding officer had finally acknowledged that she'd earned her place. On the 3rd day, Walsh's team conducted final mission rehearsals. They'd built a mock-up of the cave system based on satellite imagery, practicing approaches, contingencies, emergency extractions. Sarah ran through scenarios until her muscles ached and her mind could navigate the terrain with her eyes closed. You're ready, Walsh told her after the final rehearsal. Trust your training, trust your team, and trust those instincts that led you to pick up those puppies in the first place. That night, Sarah visited Hope and Faith one more time. The puppies were asleep, full and comfortable and safe. She thought about their father, Titan, somewhere in those mountains with Morrison's team. She thought about the courage it must have taken to send these bobbies into danger, trusting that someone would find them, understand, and act. I'm bringing your dad home, she whispered to the sleeping puppies. I promise. The infiltration began at 200 hours. A helicopter inserted Sarah's team, herself, Master Chief Sullivan and Staff Sergeant Kim, at a location 10 kilometers from the target coordinates. They would move on foot through the night, using darkness and terrain to avoid detection. Walsh and Torres would provide overwatch from a drone circling at high altitude, feeding real-time intelligence through encrypted communications. Quick reaction forces were positioned at 2 locations, ready to extract the team if things went wrong. Sarah carried 60 pounds of gear, including weapons, ammunition, communications equipment, medical supplies, and enough food and water for 3 days. Her night vision goggles turned the dark mountains into shades of green, revealing a landscape of rocks, scrub vegetation, and endless places to hide or to die. They moved in tactical silence, communicating through hand signals and subtle gestures. Sullivan took point, his decades of experience reading the terrain for threats. Kim covered their rear, her weapon sweeping constantly for signs of enemy movement. Sarah navigated, checking their position against GPS coordinates and terrain features. The mountains were treacherous, loose rock, sudden drop-offs, narrow passages that could become death traps if they encountered enemy forces. 4 hours into the movement, Sullivan raised his fist. Everyone froze. Through her night vision, Sarah saw what had stopped him, fresh tracks in the dirt, boot prints heading in the same direction they were traveling. Sullivan examined the tracks carefully, then signaled, military boots, multiple individuals, 6 hours old. The tracks could belong to Morrison's team, moving between hide sites, or they could belong to Taliban fighters patrolling the area. There was no way to know without following them. Sullivan looked at Sarah, the decision hers to make. She studied the tracks, thinking through the options. Following them could lead to contact, wanted or unwanted. Avoiding them meant potentially missing Morrison's team. Sarah made her call. She pointed forward, follow the tracks. They adjusted their formation and continued moving, now following the boot prints through the darkness. The trail led them higher into the mountains, through narrow passes that made Sarah's tactical instincts scream warnings. This was perfect ambush territory. But the tracks continued, and so did they. As dawn approached, Sullivan signaled another halt. Ahead, hidden in a fold of the mountain, Sarah could see the dark mouth of a cave, exactly where the GPS coordinates had indicated. "Overwatch, this is ground team," Sarah whispered into her radio. "We've reached the target location. Stand by." Walsh's voice came back instantly. "Copy, ground team. Thermal shows 3 signatures inside the cave. No movement detected in the surrounding area. You're clear to approach." 3 signatures, not 5, which meant either 2 members of Morrison's team had died, or the thermal imaging was missing people deeper in the cave system. Sarah signaled her intentions. Sullivan and Kim would provide security while she approached the cave entrance. If things went wrong, they would lay down covering fire while she retreated. She moved forward slowly, every sense alert. At the cave entrance, she paused, listening. From inside, she could hear faint sounds, movement, breathing, and something else. A dog's low growl. Sarah's heart leaped. That had to be Titan, Morrison's working dog, protecting his handler even in the depths of enemy territory. She needed to announce herself carefully. One wrong move, and she could be shot by the very people she was trying to rescue. "LT, Commander Morrison," she called out, her voice low but clear. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, U.S. Navy SEALs. I found your dogs. I found hope and faith. They're safe at Bagram. I'm here to bring you home." Silence, long enough that Sarah began to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then a voice, rough with exhaustion and emotion, responded from the darkness. "What were the puppy's collar colors?" It was a test, a way to verify that Sarah was telling the truth, that she'd really found Morrison's dogs and not just intercepted communications. Sarah thought back to the collars, remembering every detail. Blue for the male, red for the female, custom tactical collars with document pouches. Blue had your message about the safe house. Red had GPS coordinates and Morrison alive. Another pause, then, "Stand down, Titan." The growling stopped. A figure emerged from the darkness of the cave, moving carefully, weapon lowered but ready. Even in the dim pre-dawn light, Sarah could see he was in bad shape, gaunt, injured, exhausted. But his eyes were alert, intelligent, evaluating. "LT, Commander Morrison," Sarah asked. "What's left of him?" Morrison's gaze swept past her, checking for threats. "You came alone." "I have a team providing security. Extraction assets are standing by. Sir, we need to move quickly. Can you walk?" "I can move, but there's a problem." Morrison gestured back into the cave. "I've got 2 wounded men in there. Rivera caught shrapnel in his leg 3 weeks ago. It's infected. And Murphy took a round in the abdomen. He's stable but weak." Sarah's mind raced through the logistics. Extracting 2 wounded men through 10 kilometers of enemy territory was going to be challenging. "What about Grant and Johnson?" Morrison's expression darkened. "Didn't make it. The ambush killed them in the first 30 seconds. "I'm sorry, sir." "Save it for later. Right now, we need to get my men out of here." Morrison turned back toward the cave. "Titan, come." The dog that emerged took Sarah's breath away. Even half-starved and exhausted, Titan was magnificent, a large German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a protective stance. He moved to Morrison's side immediately, pressing against his handler's leg. "He's been keeping us alive," Morrison said, running a hand over the dog's head. "Early warning system, morale officer, and occasionally a warm blanket. Best partner I've ever had." Sarah keyed her radio. "Overwatch, ground team. I have positive contact with Morrison and his team. 2 KIA, 2 WIA requiring immediate medical attention. Requesting extraction at primary location." "Copy, ground team. QRF is spinning up now. ETA 40 minutes to extraction point." 40 minutes. They had to move 2 wounded men 10 kilometers through enemy territory in 40 minutes. With dawn breaking and visibility increasing every minute. Master Chief, Staff Sergeant, collapse on my position, Sarah ordered. We've got wounded to move. Sullivan and Kim materialized from their positions, weapons ready. Together, the team moved into the cave where Rivera and Murphy waited. The two wounded SEALs looked like hell. Rivera's leg was wrapped in improvised bandages, stained with blood and infection. Murphy was pale, his breathing shallow, clearly running on nothing but willpower and determination. But when they saw Sarah and her team, hope flickered in their eyes. Navy doesn't leave people behind, Murphy said weakly, even when they write us off as dead. Especially then, Sarah replied. She turned to Kim. Can we move them? Kim, a trained combat medic, examined both men quickly. Rivera can walk with support. Murphy needs a litter. They improvised a stretcher from equipment and began the slow, careful process of evacuating the wounded. Morrison refused to leave Titan behind, and Sarah didn't argue. The dog had earned his place in the extraction. The journey back was tense. Every sound could be an approaching enemy patrol. Every minute that passed brought more daylight and more danger of detection. Sarah rotated her team through carrying Murphy's litter, ensuring everyone stayed fresh enough to fight if necessary. They were halfway to the extraction point when Walsh's voice crackled over the radio, tense and urgent. Ground team, be advised. We've got enemy movement converging on your position from 2 directions. Looks like a Taliban patrol spotted your movement. You've got maybe 10 minutes before they're on you. Sarah checked their position. They were still 5 kilometers from the extraction point, with 2 wounded men and exhausted operators. 10 minutes wasn't enough. Overwatch, can you redirect the QRF to our current position? Negative. Terrain's too rough for landing. You need to reach the primary extraction point. Sullivan caught Sarah's eye. She could see him doing the same calculations she was. They weren't going to make it, not all of them. But Sarah hadn't come this far to leave anyone behind. Change of plans, she said. Master Chief, take Murphy and Rivera. Move as fast as you can toward extraction. Kim and I will set up a delaying position, slow down the Taliban long enough for you to clear the area. Lieutenant, Sullivan started to protest. That's an order, Master Chief. Get these men home. We'll be right behind you. Morrison stepped forward. My team, my responsibility, I'll stay with you. Sir, you're injured and exhausted. And I'm still a SEAL team commander. Plus, I've got Titan. You're going to need an early warning system. Morrison's tone left no room for argument. Sarah nodded. Kim, go with Sullivan. Help get our wounded to safety. Kim hesitated, then complied, helping to support Rivera as the group moved toward the extraction point. Sarah, Morrison, and Titan found a defensive position among the rocks, a natural choke point where the Taliban patrol would have to pass. They had maybe 5 minutes before contact. Morrison checked his weapon, his movements practiced despite his exhaustion. Titan settled between them, alert and ready. Thank you, Morrison said quietly, for finding hope and faith, for not leaving them behind. They saved you, Sarah replied. Bravest messengers I've ever seen. Titan's legacy, smart, loyal, brave, everything a working dog should be. Morrison smiled slightly. He knows they're safe. I swear the moment you mentioned them he relaxed, like he'd been waiting to hear they made it. Sarah looked at the magnificent dog, understanding suddenly the bond between handler and K9. This wasn't just a working relationship. This was family. We're getting all of you home, she said. That's a promise. The first Taliban fighters appeared on the trail below. Sarah and Morrison opened fire with precise, controlled bursts, using their superior position and training to maximum advantage. Titan barked a warning every time movement appeared from an unexpected angle. They held the position for 8 minutes, an eternity under fire. Sarah's training took over, her body moving on muscle memory while her mind calculated angles, ammunition, time. Then Walsh's voice in her ear. Ground team, wounded are loaded. QRF is inbound to your position. 30 seconds. Copy, Sarah said, squeezing off another burst. Morrison, time to go. They retreated up the trail, Titan leading the way, his nose guiding them through the rocks. Behind them, the Taliban fighters surged forward, but by then it was too late. The rescue helicopter appeared over the ridge, door gunners laying down suppressive fire that scattered the enemy forces. Sarah, Morrison, and Titan sprinted the last 100 meters and threw themselves aboard as the aircraft lifted off. Inside, Sarah found Sullivan, Kim, Rivera, and Murphy all accounted for, all alive. Dr. Akoy was there too, already working on Rivera's infected leg. And in a carrier strapped securely to the deck were Hope and Faith, reunited with their father at last. Titan went straight to the puppies, his tail wagging despite his exhaustion. The puppies climbed over each other trying to reach him, whimpering with joy. Morrison knelt beside them, tears streaming down his face, one hand on Titan and the others on his puppies. Sarah collapsed against the helicopter's wall, adrenaline finally fading, replaced by exhaustion and relief. They'd done it. Against all odds, using intelligence delivered by puppies, they'd brought Morrison's team home. Walsh appeared beside her, offering a water bottle. "Hell of a rescue, Lieutenant." "Hell of a team to rescue, ma'am." "You know the debrief is going to be extensive. A lot of people want to know how this happened, who betrayed the original mission, how Morrison survived." Sarah nodded, already dreading the paperwork and questions. "But first," Walsh continued, "you should know your actions here, finding those dogs, trusting your instincts, leading this rescue. You've set a standard. People are going to be talking about this for a long time." Sarah looked at Morrison and his reunited K9 family, at the wounded men who would live to see their families again, at her team who had trusted her leadership. "I just did what anyone would do," she said. "No," Walsh replied. "You did what a SEAL does, you brought everyone home." The debriefing began 12 hours after they landed at Bagram. Sarah had showered, eaten, and slept for 4 hours before being summoned to a secure conference room where a team of intelligence officers, JAG lawyers, and senior military officials waited. Morrison was there too, cleaned up but still gaunt, still carrying the weight of 6 weeks in hiding. Rivera was in surgery for his leg. Murphy was stable but sedated. The rest of Morrison's team, Grant and Johnson, were being processed for return to the United States, their families finally able to mourn properly. "Let's start from the beginning," said Colonel Richard Hayes, the senior intelligence officer leading the investigation. "LT Commander Morrison, walk us through the original mission." Morrison's voice was steady but hard. "We were tasked with capturing or killing Ahmed Massoud, a high-value Taliban commander with connections to foreign fighters. Intelligence indicated he would be at a compound outside of Khost on October 12th. The intelligence came from a source code-named Blackbird, run by the local CIA station." Sarah listened carefully. Blackbird, that was the informant Morrison's note had warned about, the one who had compromised the safe house. "We inserted at 200 hours, Morrison continued. "Standard approach, 4-man entry team plus myself and Titan for explosives detection. But the moment we breached the compound, we knew something was wrong. No HVT, no fighters, just an empty building rigged with explosives." Colonel Hayes leaned forward. The IEDs were already in place. "Professional work, remote detonation. Someone was watching, waiting for us to enter." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Grant and Johnson were killed in the initial blast. The rest of us fought our way out through enemy forces that had been prepositioned around the compound. It wasn't an intelligence failure. It was a deliberate ambush." "You're suggesting Blackbird set you up?" "I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you. Blackbird sold us out to the Taliban." The room erupted in murmurs. A compromised intelligence asset was bad enough, but one that had deliberately led a SEAL team into an ambush. That was treason, or as close to it as you could get in the murky world of foreign informants. "Do you have proof?" Hayes asked. "I have what I saw, and what I learned while hiding in those mountains." Morrison pulled out a weathered notebook. "While we were evading, I made contact with locals, shepherds, villagers who had no love for the Taliban. They told me about Blackbird, about how he works both sides, selling information to whoever pays more, about how he'd been bragging that he'd killed American special forces." Morrison's words hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah watched the officials exchange glances, saw the calculations being made. An informant gone bad meant burned operations, compromised agents, years of intelligence work destroyed. "We need to verify this," Hayes said carefully. "Lieutenant Chen, tell us about the puppies." Sarah walked them through finding hope and faith, the messages in their collars, her decision to investigate rather than ignore. She explained her reasoning, her research into Morrison's background, her conclusion that the dogs were a deliberate signal. "You took a significant risk," Hayes observed. "If you'd been wrong, you could have led your team into the same kind of ambush that killed Grant and Johnson." "I evaluated the risk, sir. The intelligence was solid, the message was specific, and frankly, we owed it to Commander Morrison to at least try. Even though he'd been written off as dead." Sarah met the colonel's gaze directly. "Especially because of that, sir. No one left behind means no one, not even when it's inconvenient or dangerous." Beside her, Morrison nodded slightly. The questioning continued for hours. They wanted every detail, the condition of the puppies, the exact wording of the messages, the decision-making process for the rescue. Sarah answered precisely, her training in after-action reports serving her well. Finally, Hayes closed his notebook. "We're going to need to investigate Blackbird thoroughly. In the meantime, both of you are to discuss this with no one outside of this room. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Sarah and Morrison replied in unison. But as they left the briefing, Morrison pulled Sarah aside. "They're going to try to bury this," he said quietly. "Blackbird is connected to too many operations, too many success stories. The CIA won't want to admit they've been running a double agent." "What do you want to do about it?" Morrison looked at her carefully, evaluating. "I want justice for Grant and Johnson. I want their families to know the truth, but I need someone I can trust to help make that happen." Sarah understood what he was asking. "I'm in." Over the next week, while officially confined to base for security purposes, Sarah and Morrison conducted their own investigation. They were careful, using only secure channels, speaking to people who had interacted with Blackbird, building a picture of betrayal that went deeper than anyone had suspected. Blackbird, whose real name was Karim Azizi, had been working with U.S. intelligence for 5 years. He'd provided information on Taliban movements, weapons shipments, and leadership locations. Some of that information had been good. Some had led to successful operations. But mixed in with the genuine intelligence was poison, operations that went wrong, assets that disappeared, targets who were mysteriously absent when raids occurred. The pattern had been there all along, but no one had wanted to see it. Success stories got reported. Failures got buried or attributed to bad luck. "Look at this," Morrison said one evening, showing Sarah a timeline he'd constructed. Every major operation Blackbird touched in the last 2 years had problems. Not enough to raise immediate flags, but enough that people died unnecessarily. Sarah studied the timeline, feeling sick. How many? 17 U.S. personnel, at least 40 Afghan allies, probably more we don't know about. 17 American deaths, 17 families destroyed, all because an informant had been playing both sides and no one had caught on. "We need more than timelines and suspicions," Sarah said. "We need evidence that will force them to act." Morrison smiled grimly. "I've got evidence. I just need to get it out of Afghanistan." He explained what he'd hidden in the cave documents he'd taken from the ambush site, Taliban communications he'd intercepted during the weeks in hiding, photographs of Blackbird meeting with Taliban commanders. Morrison had been gathering proof even while fighting for survival. "We need to get it," Sarah said immediately. "The cave system is compromised now. Taliban will have found it, destroyed anything left behind." "Not if we move fast. Give me the exact coordinates. I'll find a way." Morrison started to protest, then stopped. He'd already seen what Sarah could do when she committed to something. "You're sure about this?" "Justice for Grant and Johnson," Sarah said, repeating Morrison's words. "That's worth the risk." She approached Commander Walsh with a proposal. One more mission into the mountains, this time to recover intelligence materials that Morrison had cached. Walsh was skeptical but intrigued. "This is about Blackbird, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am. The official investigation is ongoing. You're supposed to let the professionals handle it." "The professionals are compromised, ma'am. Blackbird has been feeding information to the CIA for years. People there have built careers on his intelligence. They're not going to want to admit they were fooled." Walsh considered this. "You're talking about going outside the chain of command." "I'm talking about making sure the truth comes out, regardless of who it embarrasses." "That could end your career, Lieutenant." Sarah had thought about that. She'd worked so hard to get where she was, to earn her trident, to prove she belonged. Going against the system could destroy everything she'd built. But then she thought about Grant and Johnson, about 17 other Americans who died because someone had looked the other way. She thought about hope and faith, sent into danger because their handler had no other way to call for help. "Some things are more important than careers, ma'am." Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll authorize one more insertion, 24 hours. You retrieve Morrison's cash and get out. But Chen, if this goes sideways, I never approved it. Understood?" "Understood, ma'am." The second insertion was smaller, just Sarah, Sullivan, and Titan. Morrison wanted to go, but his injuries made that impossible. Instead, he briefed Sarah meticulously on the exact location of the cache, describing landmarks and features in detail. "It's in the deep section of the cave system," he explained. "Past where we were hiding, in a chamber that requires climbing. I sealed it with rocks to make it look like a natural collapse. You'll need to move about 40 pounds of stone to reach it." "What am I looking for?" "Waterproof bag, military grade. Contains documents, a hard drive with photos and intercepts, and a handwritten journal I kept during the weeks we were hiding. Everything is encrypted except the journal." Morrison handed her a small device. "This is the encryption key for the hard drive. Don't lose it. Without this, the data is useless." Sarah secured it carefully. "I'll bring it all back." "I know you will." Morrison paused, then added, "Take care of Titan. He knows that cave system better than any map." The insertion went smoothly. They reached the cave system by dawn, moving quickly through terrain that was already familiar from the first mission. Titan led the way, his nose working, his body language showing he recognized where he was going. Inside the cave, Sarah clicked on her headlamp and followed Titan deeper. The passages narrowed, requiring them to move single file. Sullivan covered their rear, alert for any signs they'd been followed. The chamber Morrison had described was exactly where he'd said, a vertical shaft requiring a climb of about 20 feet. Sarah went first, with Titan secured in a harness that Sullivan would haul up once she was in position. At the top, she found the rock pile Morrison had mentioned. Working quickly, she began removing stones, revealing a gap in the cave wall behind them. The waterproof bag was there, exactly as promised. Sarah pulled it out, verified the contents, and secured it to her pack. Then she climbed back down and they began the extraction. They were halfway back through the cave system when Titan froze, his ears forward, body tense. Sarah immediately signaled Sullivan to halt. In the silence, she could hear what had alerted the dog voices coming from the cave entrance, speaking Pashto. Taliban fighters had found their entry point. Sarah assessed quickly. They were trapped in the cave system with enemy forces between them and freedom. They could fight, but in the confined space, they'd be at a disadvantage. They could hide deeper in the caves, but that would only delay the inevitable. Or they could use the one advantage they had, Titan's knowledge of the cave system. "Is there another way out?" Sarah whispered to the dog. Titan looked at her with intelligent eyes, then turned and headed deeper into the caves, away from both the entrance and the chamber they'd just left. Sarah made the call to follow. "Trust the dog," she said to Sullivan. They moved quickly but quietly, following Titan through passages that seemed to have no logic, no pattern. Sarah had to rely completely on the dog's judgment, fighting the instinct to question or second-guess. The passages grew narrower, more difficult. At one point, they had to crawl through a gap barely wide enough for Sullivan's broad shoulders. Sarah could hear the Taliban fighters behind them now, closer, their voices echoing through the stone. Then, suddenly, they emerged into daylight, not at the main entrance but on the opposite side of the mountain, through a crack in the rock that was nearly invisible from the outside. "Good boy," Sarah breathed, scratching Titan's ears. "Very good boy." They were clear, but they were also far from their extraction point and still in enemy territory. Sarah keyed her radio. "Overwatch, ground team. We've got the package but encountered enemy forces at the primary location, requesting emergency extraction at alternate site." Walsh's response was immediate. "Copy, ground team. Sending coordinates for emergency pickup. ETA 20 minutes. Can you make it?" Sarah checked their position, calculated the distance. "We'll make it." They moved fast, Titan ranging ahead to warn of any threats. The terrain was brutal, loose rock, steep slopes, no cover. But they were SEALs, and being uncomfortable was just another day at work. The helicopter appeared on schedule, dropping into a small clearing barely large enough for landing. Sarah, Sullivan, and Titan scrambled aboard, and within seconds they were airborne, leaving the mountains and the Taliban behind. Back at Bagram, Sarah delivered the waterproof bag directly to Commander Walsh. Morrison was waiting, anxiety clear on his face, until he saw that Sarah had succeeded. "Got it all," Sarah confirmed. Walsh opened the bag carefully, examining the contents. Sarah saw her expression change as she reviewed the documents, anger, disgust, and growing determination. "This is damning," Walsh said quietly. "Chain of custody records showing Blackbird meeting with known Taliban commanders. Financial records proving he was being paid by both sides. And this journal," she looked at Morrison. "This is your first-hand account of realizing you'd been set up. Every detail, every lie Blackbird told, every operation he compromised." Morrison's voice was hard. "It's all there." "This goes higher than the local CIA station," Walsh said. "This is going to create a firestorm." "Good," Morrison replied. "Grant and Johnson deserve a firestorm." Over the next 48 hours, the contents of Morrison's cache were analyzed, verified, and compiled into a comprehensive report. Walsh bypassed the local chain of command entirely, sending everything directly to the Pentagon and to congressional oversight committees. The response was explosive. Within a week, Blackbird had been arrested by Afghan security forces and was being interrogated. The CIA station chief who had run him was relieved of duty pending investigation. 3 other operations were immediately shut down due to potential compromise. And the families of Grant and Johnson finally learned the truth. Their loved ones hadn't died in a random firefight, but had been deliberately betrayed by someone the U.S. government had trusted. Sarah watched it all unfold from Bagram, where she remained stationed while the investigation continued. She gave testimony, provided statements, and answered the same questions dozens of times. But through it all, she kept thinking about hope and faith, two puppies who had carried messages across enemy territory because their father's handler had trusted that someone would care enough to act. Morrison was recovering well, physically and emotionally. Rivera's leg had been saved by quick surgery. Murphy was stable and would make a full recovery. The survivors were being processed for return to the United States, where they would be reunited with their families. One evening, Sarah found Morrison outside the kennel where Titan, Hope, and Faith were being housed. The three dogs were playing together, the puppies climbing over their patient father while he supervised with watchful eyes. "They're going home with me," Morrison said without preamble. "Titan's earned retirement, and I'm not separating this family again." "What will you do?" Sarah asked. "Train working dogs, full-time. The Navy's offered me a position running the K-9 program at Naval Base Coronado. I can work with Titan, breed the next generation, make sure every handler has a partner as good as he is." "That sounds perfect." Morrison looked at her carefully. "I've also been authorized to select personnel for the program. I need an executive officer, someone with operational experience, someone who understands what these dogs and their handlers go through, someone who doesn't give up on anything, human or animal." Sarah felt her heart skip. "You're offering me a position." "I'm offering you a purpose. You saved my life, my team, my dogs. You fought the system to get justice for fallen operators. You're exactly the kind of leader this program needs." It was everything Sarah had been searching for without knowing it. A chance to make a difference, to honor the courage of working dogs, to ensure that what happened to Morrison's team never happened again. "What about my career as an operator?" "You'll always be a SEAL, but maybe it's time to be a SEAL who builds something instead of just breaking things. These dogs save lives. Training them right, breeding them right, pairing them with the right handlers, that saves lives too." Sarah looked at Titan, at the scars he carried, at the loyalty and courage that had kept Morrison's team alive for 6 weeks. She thought about Hope and Faith, about their impossible journey carrying messages that had sparked a rescue and exposed corruption. "When do I start?" she asked. Morrison smiled. "As soon as we get stateside. Welcome to the K-9 program, Lieutenant Chen." 6 weeks after the rescue, Sarah stood on the tarmac at Naval Air Station Norfolk, watching as a C-17 transport plane taxied to a stop. Inside were Morrison, his team, their K-9 partners, and the beginning of a new chapter. The media was there, news crews from across the country, drawn by the story of the SEAL team that had survived 6 weeks behind enemy lines and the puppies whose message had brought them home. But Morrison had been clear. He would give one statement, answer a few questions, and that was it. This wasn't about fame or recognition. This was about honoring fallen brothers and moving forward. Sarah watched as the plane's ramp lowered and Morrison emerged, Titan at his side, Hope and Faith trotting beside them. The cameras went crazy, but Morrison ignored them, walking straight to where a group of people waited, the families of David Grant and Kyle Johnson. Sarah couldn't hear what Morrison said to them, but she saw the tears, saw the embrace, saw the way he handed each family a flag that had flown over the cave where their loved ones had fought their last battle. It was private grief made public, but it was necessary. These families deserved to see the man their sons had died protecting. When Morrison finally approached the microphones, his statement was brief. 6 weeks ago, my team was betrayed and ambushed. 2 of my brothers, Chief Petty Officer David Grant and Petty Officer Second Class Kyle Johnson, gave their lives so the rest of us could survive. The puppies you've heard about, Hope and Faith, are the children of my K-9 partner Titan. They carried messages across enemy territory because I had no other way to call for help. Lieutenant Sarah Chen found them, understood what they meant, and led the team that brought us home. But this story isn't about survival or heroism. It's about betrayal, about a system that failed to protect the people who protect all of you. Changes are being made. The person responsible for the ambush has been arrested, but we can't bring Grant and Johnson back. All we can do is honor their sacrifice by making sure it never happens again. He took a few questions, carefully screened ones about the rescue, about the puppies, about the future. Then he politely but firmly ended the press conference and walked away. Sarah met him at the hangar entrance. "Well done, sir." "I hate that political stuff," Morrison admitted, "but their families deserve to hear it." "What happens now?" "Now we get to work." The Navy K-9 program facility at Naval Base Coronado was a sprawling complex of kennels, training areas, and veterinary facilities. When Sarah arrived 3 days later to begin her new assignment, she found a world she'd never fully appreciated before. There were over 60 working dogs at the facility, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Labrador Retrievers, each bred and trained for specific missions. Explosives detection, patrol work, tracking, search and rescue. The dogs represented years of careful breeding, thousands of hours of training, and millions of dollars of investment. But more than that, they represented partnerships. Every dog had a handler, and every handler trusted their K-9 partner with their life. Morrison gave Sarah a comprehensive tour, introducing her to handlers and their dogs, explaining breeding programs and training protocols. She met puppies just beginning their journey and retired dogs living out their years in comfort. She learned about the science of scent detection, about canine psychology, about the careful process of matching handler temperaments with dog personalities. "It's not just about training," Morrison explained as they watched a young handler working with her Belgian Malinois. "It's about building relationships. The dog has to trust the handler completely and vice versa. Break that trust and the partnership fails." Sarah understood. She'd seen that trust in action, Titan protecting Morrison's team, hope and faith carrying their impossible messages, the bond that had kept them all alive. "Your first project," Morrison continued, leading her to a specialized section of the kennel, "is overseeing Titan's breeding program. He's proven himself in the field. His offspring carry those same traits: intelligence, courage, loyalty, scent detection abilities. We're going to breed the next generation of elite working dogs, and you're going to manage it." It was a massive responsibility. Sarah would oversee every aspect, selecting breeding partners, managing pregnancies and births, evaluating puppies, making decisions about which ones would enter training programs and which would be adopted out to carefully screened civilian families. "What about hope and faith?" Sarah asked. Morrison smiled. "They're going to be part of the program too. Hope shows promise for detection work. His nose is exceptional. Faith." He paused, considering. "Faith might be more suited for therapy work. She's got the right temperament for it, calm, patient, empathetic. We're going to test both of them, see where their strengths lie." Over the following weeks, Sarah immersed herself in her new role. She studied canine genetics, learned about training methodologies, and spent hours observing how handlers and dogs worked together. She also got to know the individual dogs, learning their personalities and quirks. Titan took a particular interest in her, often seeking her out during her rounds. Morrison explained that the dog recognized her as part of his pack, the person who had helped rescue his handler, who had protected his puppies. "He trusts you," Morrison said one afternoon as Titan sat calmly while Sarah examined him. "That's not something he gives easily." Sarah scratched the big dog's ears, feeling honored by that trust. "He's an incredible animal." "He's more than that. He's a hero who happens to have 4 legs." The breeding program proved to be complex and fascinating. Sarah worked with veterinarians to select optimal breeding partners for Titan, considering not just physical traits but temperament, working ability, and genetic health. Every decision was carefully documented, every outcome analyzed. When Titan was bred to a championship-level Belgian Malinois named Luna, Sarah oversaw the entire process, from conception through pregnancy to the birth of 7 healthy puppies. Watching those tiny, blind newborns develop into confident, curious juveniles was one of the most rewarding experiences of her career. But the program wasn't just about breeding. Sarah also worked with handlers returning from deployment, helping them process the retirement of their K-9 partners and transition to civilian life. She saw the grief when a beloved working dog had to retire due to age or injury, and she facilitated the adoptions that allowed those dogs to spend their final years in comfort and peace. One handler, a young petty officer named Jake Martinez, was particularly struggling with his dog's retirement. "Rex saved my life 4 times in Afghanistan," Martinez said, his voice tight with emotion. "How do I just hand him over to a civilian family?" "You're not handing him over," Sarah said gently. "You're giving him the retirement he earned, and the adoption program ensures he goes to people who understand what he's been through, who will treat him with the respect he deserves." She introduced Martinez to the family who would be adopting Rex, a retired Marine and his wife who had already successfully adopted 2 other military working dogs. Watching Martinez say goodbye to his partner was heartbreaking, but Sarah also saw the relief on his face when he realized Rex was going to be loved and cared for. 6 months into her new role, Sarah received an unexpected visitor, Commander Patricia Walsh, the JSOC officer who had authorized the rescue mission. "I heard you'd found your calling," Walsh said, touring the kennel facility with Sarah. "It's different from operating," Sarah admitted, "but it feels right. You're making a real difference here. These dogs, these handlers, they're going to save lives because of the work you're doing." Walsh paused at Titan's kennel, where the big dog was supervising Hope and Faith as they practiced scent detection exercises. "The Blackbird investigation concluded last week," Walsh said. "Karim Azizi was convicted of treason by an Afghan court. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. The CIA officers who failed to catch his betrayal have been disciplined or forced into retirement, and the oversight protocols for handling informants have been completely overhauled." "Justice for Grant and Johnson," Sarah said quietly. "Thanks to you and Morrison. You didn't let it go. You fought for the truth even when it would have been easier to stay quiet." Walsh turned to face Sarah directly. "I came here to offer you something. JSOC is creating a new K-9 division, specialized dogs and handlers for counterterrorism operations. We want you to help develop the program, to train the next generation of operators who will work with these animals. It's a promotion, significant increase in responsibility and visibility." It was exactly the kind of opportunity Sarah would have jumped at a year ago. Career advancement, prestigious assignment, a chance to prove herself on the biggest stage. But looking at Titan, Hope, and Faith, thinking about the handlers she'd helped and the dogs she'd placed in loving homes, Sarah realized something important. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I'm where I need to be." Walsh smiled. "I thought you might say that. Morrison said you'd found your purpose." He was right. After Walsh left, Sarah returned to the training area where Morrison was working with a new group of handler candidates. He saw her approaching and signaled for a break. "Walsh tried to recruit you," he said. "It wasn't a question." "How did you know?" "Because she tried to recruit me first. Told her the same thing you did. I'm exactly where I need to be." They stood together, watching handlers and dogs run through exercises, the partnerships growing stronger with each repetition. "You know what I realized," Sarah said. "For years, I thought I had to prove I was as tough as any male SEAL, that I had to do the most dangerous missions, earn the most medals. But that's not what service is about." "What is it about?" Morrison asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "It's about finding where you can make the most difference and committing to it completely. Whether that's kicking down doors in hostile territory or training dogs to save lives, the mission matters, not the glory. Morrison nodded. Took me 6 weeks hiding in a cave to figure that out. You're smarter than I am. A year after the rescue, the Navy held a ceremony honoring Morrison's team and the K-9 partners who had served alongside them. Grant and Johnson were posthumously awarded Silver Stars. Rivera, Murphy, and Morrison received Bronze Stars with Valor. And Titan, Hope, and Faith were recognized with special commendations for their roles in the rescue and recovery operation. Sarah stood in the audience, watching as Morrison accepted the awards on behalf of his team. The families of Grant and Johnson were there, their grief still visible but tempered now by time and truth. The entire event was a celebration of courage, sacrifice, and the bonds between humans and animals. But the moment Sarah would remember most came after the official ceremony, when a young girl, Grant's daughter, maybe 10 years old, approached Morrison. "My dad talked about you," she said, her voice small but steady. "He said you were the best commander he ever had. He said Titan was the best dog." Morrison knelt down to her level. "Your dad was one of the best operators I ever worked with. He saved my life more than once, and he talked about you all the time. He was so proud of you." The girl looked at Titan, who sat calmly beside Morrison. "Can I pet him?" Titan would be honored. Sarah watched as the girl tentatively reached out, and Titan gently nuzzled her hand. The simple interaction, a child finding comfort in the same dog who had fought alongside her father, captured everything about the K-9 program that mattered. These weren't just tools or weapons. They were partners, companions, sources of comfort and courage. They connected past and present, honoring those who had fallen while training those who would continue the mission. That evening, Sarah found herself back at the kennel, checking on the latest litter of puppies. 8 healthy German shepherds, Titan's offspring, each one destined for training and eventual service alongside military handlers. Morrison joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Long day," he observed. "Good day," Sarah corrected. Seeing those families get closure, honoring Grant and Johnson properly, that mattered. "You made it possible. If you hadn't found hope and faith, if you hadn't trusted what they meant, none of this happens. We die in that cave. The truth about Blackbird stays buried. Grant and Johnson's families never get answers." Sarah shook her head. The puppies made it possible. They were brave enough to carry those messages, smart enough to find help. I just paid attention. "You did more than that. You built something from it." Morrison gestured at the kennel facility, at the puppies, at everything they'd created together. "This program is going to save lives for decades. Every dog we train right, every handler we prepare properly, every partnership we build, that's lives saved, missions accomplished, people coming home." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the puppies play. Hope had entered formal training and was excelling at explosives detection. Faith had indeed proven to have a gift for therapy work and was being prepared to work with wounded veterans. Both were living up to their names, symbols of hope and faith in the midst of chaos and danger. "Do you ever miss it?" Morrison asked. "Operating direct action, the adrenaline." Sarah considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But then I think about what we're doing here, and I realize this is my fight now. Making sure the next generation is better prepared, better trained, better protected than we were." "No regrets?" "Not one." Morrison raised his coffee cup in a mock toast to finding purpose in unexpected places. "To puppies who saved a SEAL team," Sarah countered. "To both," Morrison agreed. 3 years after the rescue, Sarah stood in the main training arena, watching as a young handler named Corporal James Foster worked through an advanced explosives detection course with his K-9 partner, a 2-year-old German shepherd named Thunder. Thunder was Hope's offspring, carrying the bloodline of courage and intelligence that had started with Titan. Watching him work, confident, focused, executing commands with precision. Sarah felt profound satisfaction. This was the legacy they were building, one dog at a time. Morrison approached from the observation deck, carrying a tablet with training scores. "Thunder just set a new facility record," he said with obvious pride. "Perfect detection rate, fastest completion time, and Foster's handling was textbook. They're ready for deployment." Sarah made notes in her own tablet. "Foster requested assignment to Afghanistan, wants to follow in his father's footsteps." Morrison's expression grew serious. "David Foster served with me in Iraq. Good man. Killed by an IED in 2019. "I know. James told me about it. Said his dad always talked about the K9 teams, about how the dogs saved lives. When his dad died, James decided to become a handler." "Circle of service," Morrison said quietly. "The next generation carrying forward what we started." It was a pattern Sarah had seen repeatedly. Children of fallen service members joining the K9 program, handlers whose lives had been saved by military working dogs returning to train the next generation, civilians inspired by stories of canine heroism volunteering to support the program. The program Sarah and Morrison had built had grown beyond their initial vision. They now trained dogs not just for combat deployment, but for security work, search and rescue, therapy, and even autism service support for military families. Every aspect was carefully managed, from breeding selection through retirement placement. Faith, who had never deployed to combat zones, had become the facility's star therapy dog. She worked with wounded warriors at the VA hospital, visited military families dealing with PTSD, and provided comfort at funerals for fallen service members. Her gentle nature and intuitive understanding of human emotion made her perfect for the role. Sarah often accompanied Faith on her therapy visits, watching how the dog could calm a combat veteran experiencing panic attacks or bring a smile to a child whose parent was deployed overseas. Faith's gift wasn't explosive detection or enemy tracking, it was healing. One afternoon, Sarah brought Faith to the VA hospital for a scheduled therapy session with a group of combat veterans. Among them was a woman Sarah immediately recognized, Petty Officer First Class Antonio Rivera, the medic from Morrison's team. "Lieutenant Chen," Rivera said, surprise and pleasure evident on his face. "I didn't know you worked with the therapy dogs." "Rivera, it's good to see you. How's the leg?" He gestured to his left leg, which had a noticeable limp. "Still works mostly. Ended my active duty career, but I'm managing. The docs here are helping with pain management and mobility." Sarah introduced him to Faith, who immediately pressed against his leg, offering comfort without being asked. Rivera's hand went to the dog's head automatically, his entire body relaxing. "Is this?" he started to ask. "Titan's daughter," Sarah confirmed. "One of the puppies Morrison sent for help." Rivera's eyes filled with tears. "These dogs saved my life. Twice, once by getting you to rescue us, and now by helping me deal with everything that came after." They talked for an hour after the therapy session. Rivera explained that he'd been struggling with PTSD, survivor's guilt over Grant and Johnson's deaths, and chronic pain from his injuries. The combination had nearly broken him. "But working with these therapy dogs," he said, watching Faith interact with other veterans, "it's helping. They don't judge, they don't pity, they just understand." Sarah made a decision. "How would you feel about joining our program? We're looking for people to help manage the therapy dog division. Your medical background, your combat experience, your personal understanding of what these dogs can do, you'd be perfect." Rivera looked stunned. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a purpose. Same thing Morrison offered me 3 years ago." 2 weeks later, Rivera joined the program as the coordinator of therapeutic K9 services. Watching him work with Faith and the other therapy dogs, seeing the healing that happened both for him and through him, Sarah understood the full scope of what they'd built. This wasn't just about training military working dogs. It was about creating connections between handlers and K9 partners, between wounded warriors and healing animals, between past sacrifice and future service. Titan, now 8 years old, had officially retired from breeding duties but remained active around the facility. He'd become a mentor of sorts, used to teach young dogs proper behavior and to evaluate handler candidates. Morrison joked that Titan had become the wise old professor of the K9 program, passing on his knowledge to the next generation. Hope had deployed twice to Afghanistan, each time performing flawlessly. He detected 17 IEDs, saving countless lives. His handler, a staff sergeant named Maria Santos, credited Hope with keeping her entire squad safe during a particularly intense deployment. Hope doesn't just detect explosives, Santos had told Sarah during a recent visit. He reads situations, anticipates threats, and communicates in ways that go beyond training. It's like he inherited his father's intelligence and courage. The program's success had drawn attention from other branches of the military and even civilian law enforcement. Sarah regularly gave presentations at conferences, sharing the methodologies and philosophies that made their program effective. But she always emphasized the same core principles: respect for the animals, proper breeding and selection, thorough training, and the critical importance of the handler K9 bond. One evening, Morrison found Sarah in her office, reviewing breeding records and puppy evaluations. "You're working too late," he observed, placing a cup of tea on her desk. "Says the man who's here at the same time I am," Sarah countered with a smile. Morrison sat down across from her. "I've been thinking about the next phase of the program. We've proven the model works. We're producing exceptional working dogs. Our handlers are the best trained in the military, but I think we can do more." "What did you have in mind?" "Education. I want to create a formal school, not just for handlers, but for program managers from other bases, other countries even. Share what we've learned, help other facilities improve their programs. A center of excellence for military working dog operations." It was ambitious. It was exactly the kind of big-picture thinking that had made Morrison such an effective commander. "We'd need funding," Sarah said, already thinking through logistics, "and approval from pretty high up the chain." "I've already put in the request. With our success rate and the lives these dogs have saved, I think we can make a compelling case." Over the next 6 months, they developed the proposal: a comprehensive school that would train not just handlers but breeders, veterinarians, program administrators, and behavioral specialists. It would be the premier institution for military working dog excellence, drawing students from across the Department of Defense and allied nations. The approval came through on a Thursday afternoon. Sarah was working with a litter of puppies when Morrison found her, waving a printed email. "We got it. Full funding, facility expansion, everything we asked for." Sarah felt a surge of excitement and pride. "We're really going to do this. We're really going to change how the entire military approaches K9 operations." "But Sarah," Morrison paused, his expression serious, "I want you to run it. Director of the Military Working Dog Center of Excellence. It should be you." "Morrison, it's your vision. And you made it real. You took a combat officer who'd been hiding in a cave and helped him build something that matters. You've trained dozens of handlers, placed hundreds of dogs, and created a culture of excellence. You're the right person for this." Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. From being a supply officer who felt overlooked and undervalued, to finding 2 puppies in a destroyed Afghan compound, to building a program that was literally changing lives. She thought about hope and faith, about Titan, about all the dogs and handlers whose lives had been improved by the work they'd done. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it." The Military Working Dog Center of Excellence opened 2 years later on a beautiful spring day. The facility was state-of-the-art, expanded kennels, advanced training areas, classrooms equipped with the latest technology, veterinary facilities that could handle everything from routine care to complex surgeries. The opening ceremony drew dignitaries from across the military and government. But for Sarah, the most meaningful attendees were the handlers and their K-9 partners, over 100 teams representing every aspect of the program's work. Thunder and Corporal Foster were there, fresh from their second deployment and scheduled to be guest instructors at the school. Faith stood calmly beside Rivera, who had become the face of the therapy dog program. Hope and Santos represented the combat detection teams. And Titan, now 10 years old but still dignified, sat beside Morrison as the elder statesman of the entire operation. When Sarah stood to speak, she looked out at the assembled crowd and felt overwhelming gratitude. 5 years ago, she began, I found 2 puppies in a destroyed building in Afghanistan. They were scared, alone, and desperate. But they were also carrying a message, a plea for help from brave men who'd been abandoned and forgotten. I could have walked past them. I could have assumed they were just strays, just another casualty of war. But something made me stop, made me look closer, made me care. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Those 2 puppies, Hope and Faith, changed my life. They led to the rescue of LT Commander Morrison's team. They exposed corruption that had cost American lives. And they inspired the creation of this facility and everything it represents. But more than that, they taught me something fundamental about service and purpose. Sarah looked at Morrison, then at the handlers and their dogs. The strongest partnerships aren't built on rank or authority. They're built on trust, respect, and mutual dedication to something larger than ourselves. Every dog in this program represents that principle. Every handler who bonds with their K-9 partner embodies it, and every life saved by these incredible animals proves it. She gestured to the new facility behind her. This center exists to honor that partnership, to perfect it, to ensure that every future generation of handlers and dogs is even better prepared than the last. We owe that to the handlers who trust these animals with their lives. We owe it to the dogs who serve with courage they can't even comprehend. And we owe it to the memory of every service member in K-9 who made the ultimate sacrifice. The ceremony concluded with a demonstration, teams working through detection exercises, obedience drills, and finally, a moving tribute where therapy dogs worked with wounded veterans. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience when Faith gently placed her head in the lap of a veteran having a PTSD episode, her presence alone calming his distress. That evening, after the crowds had left and the facility had quieted, Sarah found Morrison in the memorial garden they'd created, a peaceful space honoring K-9 partners who'd given their lives in service. Plaques commemorated dogs from across decades of military operations, their names and achievements preserved for future generations. "We did good work today," Morrison said as Sarah joined him. "We did good work 5 years ago when we decided to build something that mattered." Titan appeared from the shadows, moving more slowly than in his prime but still alert and capable. He settled between Sarah and Morrison, content in the presence of his pack. "I got my orders today," Morrison said quietly. "Mandatory retirement, 25 years in the Navy, and they're finally forcing me out." Sarah felt a pang of concern. "What will you do?" Morrison smiled. "The same thing I've been doing. The Navy might be retiring me, but this program isn't. I'll stay on as a civilian advisor, keep working with the school, keep breeding the next generation of working dogs. I'm not done yet." "Good, because I'm not ready to do this without you." "You don't need me anymore, Sarah. You haven't for a while, but I'm glad to stay anyway." They sat in comfortable silence, the 3 of them, 2 humans and a dog who had started it all, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Sarah thought about the scared supply officer she'd been, desperate to prove herself, feeling inadequate and overlooked. She thought about the moment she'd found hope and faith, the decision to trust her instincts despite regulations and skepticism. She thought about leading the rescue mission, fighting for justice, and finally finding her true purpose. The path hadn't been what she'd expected, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. "Morrison," she said after a while. "Yeah. Thank you for trusting me with this, for giving me the chance to build something meaningful. Thank you for finding my puppies, for not giving up on them or me or any of this." Titan yawned and stretched, clearly ready for bed. Morrison stood, and the old dog followed him toward the kennel facility where he still preferred to sleep, near his children and grandchildren. Sarah remained in the garden a while longer, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, the first class of students would arrive at the Center of Excellence. There would be handlers to train, dogs to evaluate, programs to run, and a future to build. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply be grateful for the puppies who had carried impossible messages, for the SEAL team that had survived against all odds, for the program that had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations, and for the simple truth that sometimes the most important missions aren't the ones you plan for. They're the ones you stumble into when you stop to care about two scared puppies clinging to your leg. That choice, to stop, to care, to act, had changed everything. It had saved lives, exposed corruption, built careers, and created a legacy that would continue saving lives for generations to come. Sarah stood and walked toward the facility, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Behind her, the memorial garden stood quiet and peaceful, honoring all the K-9 partners who had served with courage. And somewhere in the kennels, hope and faith slept peacefully, their own service continuing in the children they would have, in the handlers they would train, and in the lives they had already saved simply by being brave enough to carry a message across enemy territory. The mission had started with 2 puppies and a desperate plea for help. It had become a legacy of courage, partnership, and the unbreakable bonds between warriors and their 4-legged companions. And it was just beginning. The end.